Whenever you're thinking of going to see a movie and you want to know whether it's worth seeing or not, where's the first place you look? Probably right here. The Rotten Tomatoes score. It has been shown time and time again that this singular number can heavily affect the box office sales of any given movie. I'm sure you've probably used this number to determine whether you were going to go see a movie or not before. I mean, why wouldn't you? The number is sitting right there whenever you search for showtimes for that movie. But this method can be quite problematic. And I'll tell you why. First off, where exactly do you think they actually get this number? What does it even mean? Most people would make the assumption that this number represents the overall quality of the film. If it has 90%, that must mean the movie's 90% good. If it has 50%, it must be half really good and the other half not so good. In some cases, this can be true. But based on where these numbers actually come from, I think it's safe to say that this assumption is quite inaccurate. Now time for the explanation of how they actually get this number. Every critic on the website is given only two options when rating a film. It either gets a rotten rating or a fresh rating. Rotten means it's bad, fresh means it's good. Whatever percentage of critics give the movie a fresh rating is what this number ends up being. For example, if there were 100 critics rating one movie and 60 of them gave it a fresh rating and 40 of them gave it a rotten rating, then the overall Rotten Tomatoes score of that movie would end up being a 60%. If all 100 gave it a fresh rating, the overall rating would be 100%. If all of them gave it a rotten rating, the overall rating would be 0. So you get how that works? Let's move on. On the surface, this may seem just fine, but let's look at one of the examples I just gave to give you a bit of an idea why this is a problem. If a film gets 100%, it means that all critics gave it a positive rating, right? But what if all of these critics think that the movie is just barely good enough to get a positive rating? What if each one of these individual critics would actually give the film a 60%? They gave it a positive rating because in their minds, 60% is just barely good enough to get a positive rating. So what you end up with is a film that has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, even though, based on each of the critics' individual ratings of the film, a more accurate rating would be 60%. This can go both ways. What if all the critics thought it was just barely low enough to get a rotten rating, and all of them gave it a rotten rating? Well, then you might end up with a film that has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, even though a more accurate rating might be 40 or 50%. The major issue with this is the fact that a lot of people actually use this number as a way to tell the overall quality of a movie in order to decide whether they want to go see it or not. Their overall decision may end up being skewed by an inaccurate rating system. So if you are like me and you understand why this is a bad thing and you want somewhere else to go to get your movie ratings that's not Rotten Tomatoes, here are a few better options. First off, there's Metacritic, which takes reviews from all the best critics and compiles them all into one number. This number's a bit more accurate because it takes into account more than just either positive or negative ratings. The only issue I have with this one is that it actually does sometimes add more weight to certain critics' reviews based on their status. Next, we have IMDb, which is a database for information about any movie or TV show. Each person on this website can give ratings to a movie from 1 to 10. These then get compiled into one overall percentage, which is more accurate than Rotten Tomatoes because it takes into account a wider range of ratings. It understands that movies aren't just either good or bad. A lot of times they're somewhere in between. I do like this a little bit better than Metacritic because it doesn't give more weight to certain critics. Then there's Letterboxd, which is actually quite similar to IMDb. The major difference that I've noticed is that it uses a star rating rather than a number rating, but you can do half stars, so technically there's still 10 ratings that you can give it. It's also not quite as popular as IMDb, so there's not going to be as many ratings on there, so you're not going to get quite as wide of a range of ratings to add into the overall number, so it might not be as accurate. So even though Rotten Tomatoes is by far the most inaccurate movie rating website, it still continues to be the most popular. So next time you're deciding whether to see a movie or not, you should be looking at these numbers instead of this number. And be sure to mention the Metacritic rating, the IMDb rating, and even the Letterboxd rating when you're recommending a movie to a friend rather than using the Rotten Tomatoes rating. So, next time you see a Rotten Tomatoes score, remember this. It's actually quite a rotten way of judging the quality of a movie.